Hello, everyone. Welcome to Or This. This is my Monday morning quarterbacking of the scriptures in the sermon for the previous Sunday, and this video is from Sunday, July 9th. The scriptures for the day were, the psalm was Psalm 45, verses 10 through 17. The New Testament reading was Romans chapter 7, verses 15 through 25a. The Gospel was Matthew chapter 11, verses 16 through 19 and 25 through 30. And the reading that we had from the Old Testament is a continuation of our series of readings from the book of Genesis. So this one was chopped up a little bit. It was Genesis chapter 24, verses 34 to 38, 42 to 49, and 58 to 63. No, 58 to 67. I'm staring right at it. It's perfectly fine if you want to read the whole chapter 24 that tells the whole story. But it was the story of the marriage of Isaac, the son of Abraham and Sarah, Isaac to Rebekah, who is somebody that Abraham's servant went out and found by God's guidance to bring back and marry Isaac. But I preached on that, so I'm not going to go into that in this video. What I wanted to talk about was the gospel from Matthew chapter 11. And I did a children's message based off of the gospel, particularly the end of the gospel, the last verses 25 to 30 of chapter 11, where we have this familiar verse that says, "Come to me, all you who are carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." I believe I quoted that correctly. And I wanted to talk about the idea of this yoke when Jesus talks about, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me." Now, there's kind of two images of what this particular yoke is. It has nothing to do with eggs, so it's not an egg yoke. The first is the image from an agricultural society, from farming, where a yoke would actually have two animals yoked together. It would be like this, I believe there would be a wooden kind of contraption made to hold the two animals in place side by side so that they can then pull a piece of machinery. I don't know if there's a specific kind of farming machinery that you would need to, for example, two oxen to pull. But the point is, whatever it would be something that you need two animals to do, because otherwise the burden is too much. So a yoke brings these two animals together to do something that one animal probably can't do on its own. And I think that's probably the image we think of. In fact, that's the image that I went with for the children's message, where I took a backpack and I filled it with my commentaries, and then I had my daughter try to pick it up, and she couldn't. She's 3. It's heavy for me, so she certainly couldn't pick it up. And then I had her try to pick it up while I was trying to pick it up, and we both held it together. And therefore, because there were 2 of us picking up the burden together, it was easier. And so I went with that idea of it. Jesus says even, my burden is light. And so that image, that agricultural image of bearing something that's heavy to get with 2 people rather than just one, probably resonates through that passage a little bit more. And like I said, that's what I talk to the children about, is that if we want to try to carry something heavy and we can't do it by ourselves, it's easier to have another person do it. Then we both bear the weight, and then both people can possibly carry something that one person can't. And I talked about the burdens of life and how, and in the same sense, so the burdens of life are heavier when we try to bear them ourselves, as opposed to if we share them with somebody, whether it's to talk to somebody about that, whether it's to invite somebody to walk with us through a difficult illness and do things to help us. Or it doesn't even have to be an illness. If somebody is helping to support us in some way through a challenging, trying time, then we're bearing the burden of life, the emotional burden, or it can be even a practical burden. We're bearing it together, and it's not as heavy. And so there's that aspect of understanding what, that Jesus, and we use that verse very much with that association in mind. Not just I don't know why this comes to me as an afterthought. That happened at the children's message, and it happened now. Jesus is the one saying this, right? So Jesus is saying, it's Jesus saying that he bears our burdens with us. So it's not just other people, but when we're going through something, when we talk to God about it, when we bear this burden to Jesus, he carries it with us, helps to lighten the load a little bit. So however, there is another way of talking about yoke in those days, and that had to do with the teaching of a rabbi. I learned this from Rob Bell, from one of his videos, I believe, or maybe it was from his book, Velvet Elvis. The idea of the yoke is there were multiple rabbis, and each rabbi had their own interpretation of how to live out the Jewish law. And they would gather disciples who wanted to learn from them about their interpretation of to live out the Jewish law. So Jesus was a rabbi, he had disciples, and so he's teaching them how to live out their faith, basically, how to live out this law that God gave to God's people. And so the yoke means, the yoke refers to the teaching of a particular rabbi. So when Jesus says, my yoke is easy, come, take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart. My yoke is easy, my burden is light. He's also talking about his teachings. And what do his teachings say? Well, Jesus' teachings don't require anybody to be perfect people. Jesus' teachings don't lay heavier burdens upon people who are already burdened. In fact, Jesus comes to release the burdens of those who are most burdened in society. And when Jesus teaches the kingdom of God has come near, that kingdom and that teaching is that God loves you in the midst of the burdens that you are bearing. And those could be anything from having a family member, in those days I'm saying, from having a family member who you would have relied upon for financial support, but that particular person, male, becomes disabled and can't work, and then somebody else has to try to figure out a way to support the family, or somebody, we talk about widows and orphans quite frequently. If they were among the poorest of the people because orphans didn't have a parent to take care of them, or to support them financially. Widows, if they didn't have some male in their family to take care of them, they also had to figure out, what to do to exist, basically. And so, but again, not only did people have the practical issues of trying to exist, but then in many cases the faith leaders, in some cases the faith leaders were adding an extra burden by saying that somehow this is something that they deserved, or that God didn't, that God was punishing them, and that so don't interfere with what God's doing. Jesus' teaching, on the other hand, came and said, it removed all of that guilt from those who were struggling, to say, no, God's not punishing you. In fact, God would like you to be helped. So those who have who have more, give what you have to those who give less. Help those who don't have society's means to support themselves. So, help them. Forgive sins. You're not meant to live in the guilt of your sin forever for the rest of your life, but forgive sins. God forgives sins. And this was Jesus' message. You can imagine a message like this would make you almost feel like the burden is being lifted. You might feel lighter. And so the idea of helping one another would allow for that burden to be shared, and releasing the guilt of sin so that you're not living in it for the rest of your life. Again, that burden is taken off because of Jesus. And so those are some ways of understanding what it is that Jesus is saying there. But I think it's important for us to realize from this particular passage, or this verse even, this section of this passage, that burden sharing is part of the life of faith. And you can't burden share if you're trying to live out your faith all by yourself. So that's the whole point of having a faith community, is we help to release burdens, whether it's reminding each other that we're forgiven, or whether it's providing for those in need, whether it's acknowledging somebody's value and the gifts that they have. That is that's why we have a shared faith, and not a faith that we live on our own and that's it. There's a well-known saying out there that is just not true. God will never give you more than what you can handle. I'm pretty sure that there's people out there who could testify to the fact that that doesn't feel like it's true at all. But what God does do is, when we are overwhelmed with things that we feel like we can't handle, God is there, and God provides others to be there to help us deal with it, so the burden doesn't feel so heavy. Life puts these burdens on us. God gives us the people and God's own presence to help to share the burdens that life gives us, to lift and make them less burdensome and help us to feel lighter. And that's what Jesus came to teach us all, to recognize for our lives, and also to recognize as we encounter others who are bearing burdens in their lives, so that nobody's bearing them alone. Everybody knows that God is with us, and everybody has others to help them. So those are some thoughts from the gospel passage from this past week. You're welcome to share your thoughts either in the comments, either on YouTube or on Facebook, about this video, about the sermon, about any of the scriptures of the day, whatever thoughts or questions you might have. And thank you so much for watching. God bless.